ജ്ഞാനഭക്തിപരാക്കിയ സംകോളം നിരന്തര സന്തോഷം നിത്യതിരപ്തി സുഖിർവം സ്വച്ഛിദാനന്ദ സ്വരൂപം നിരുഷ്ടിലയ പോദ ഭവനാതീതം ബ്രഹ്മജ്ഞാന ശിവോഹം ശിവോഹം കേശകാല വസ്തു പരിച്ഛേദരഹിതം.
Hey, hello, and welcome everyone to the next episode of Om-gnosis, the Occult South Asia podcast. I'm Keith Edward Cantú, a research affiliate here at the Center for the Study of World Religions and a lecturer at Harvard Divinity School. And today I have the privilege of being joined by Marleen Thaler, who holds a PhD in religious studies along with additional degrees in social and cultural anthropology and Oriental studies, all from the University of Vienna. She's been a research fellow in Zurich and Santa Barbara, California, served as a scholar in residence at the Esalen Institute in Big Sur, California, and studied at the Hebrew University in Jerusalem. Currently, she's a postdoctoral research fellow at the Department of Religious Studies at the University of Graz, and is also employed at the University of Vienna's Research Center, Religion and Transformation in Contemporary Society. So it's a great privilege to have you join us today. And I guess for the viewers, we could sort of get started by you telling us a little bit about your background, especially what drew you into the study of alternative religions, the modern history of yoga, and so on. We've known each other for several years now, so I know a little bit about your work, but not the whole story.
Yeah. Thank you, Keith, so much for having me. It's really a privilege to be here, meeting you here at Harvard and being part of your podcast. So that's really great. So yeah, you already talked a bit about what I'm doing right now, but how did I get there? Mm-hmm. So I have a background in anthropology, and so I remember I was taking this one class on ritual and consciousness studies, and that has been like a major turning point. Like I was like, oh my God, what are these topics that nobody can explain? And that's kind of like how I got into religious studies. And then as I was taking classes there was this very interesting professor. His name was Karl Baier.
Okay,
some of you might have heard of him. And so I ended up taking every single class that he offered. And the classes, they ranged from psychedelics, yoga, mysticism, esotericism, occultism. So the whole range of like topics that I really started to burn for. And that's kind of like how I got like more and more interested and more versed in these kind of topics. And back then I was a student, so I never imagined that I would one day write something myself that students would read. But that's kind of like how everything got started. And then ever since these first classes with Karl, I just sticked with him. I did my master thesis with him, and then I continued doing my PhD with him, and I was very blessed. I was the last PhD student he accepted, and that was like wonderful to learn so much from such a gifted person and scholar.
Sure, yeah. Wow, well, what a privilege, to be someone's last student as well, and to be able to kind of have that consistency, I think, in a single program as well, to really, make the best of those resources.
I was the last accepted, but not the last that's defended.
The last that defended. Okay, so good. So you're proceeding in a timely manner. Okay. Yeah. So you completed. I mean, speaking of your studies, your thesis was on the topic of Kundalini in modern occult and therapeutic contexts. Could you describe some of your main findings and give our viewers a sense of this wider history into the 20th century?
Yeah, Kundalini.
Yeah.
So Kundalini, the Arthur Avalon project famously called the serpent power, was something that was like my closest companion for the past 5 or 6 years. And I still remember, again, Karl Baier. I was sitting in his office, and I was just accepted the position of a PhD fellow at the Department of Religious Studies at the University of Vienna. And so the project was like, broadly speaking about energy healing. Okay, so that project that was a research application that my colleague Marleen Thaler received, and they had a second position, and so that one was I received that one, and so I was like, okay, energy healing. So I guess I have to find an energy that suits me, that I'm gonna work with.
There you go.
And then Karl and I we started thinking of energy, what two scholars do, right?
Yeah, brainstorm about energy. Okay, that sounds good.
And then Karl was like, oh wow, do you know there's this serpent? It's like this subtle energy that has been so influential, but there hasn't really been any research on it, like any solid like research exclusively focusing on the history of this vital force. And then I was like, wow, all right, that sounds pretty interesting. And I was kind of like always drawn to serpents, even like before that research. So I was like instantly, I was like, oh my god, that's my topic. So that's kind of like how this story started. And then, as you all know, who did a PhD, it took forever to really like properly frame the topic and to really understand what I'm actually aiming for. So after a few revision phases, and also in response to the project of Anja Foxen and Trevor Nabota-Kativarma, who were also working on Kundalini at the same time, which I wasn't aware in the beginning, and then luckily like our path crossed so that we could collaborate and also like define each other's projects distinct from each other. So after these phases, I was like, okay, there's one person that struck me particularly interesting, and that was Gopi Krishna.
Gopi Krishna, yes.
Yes, Gopi Krishna. He wrote a very influential experience report. It was actually the first experience report in English language at this length. He published it in the late 60s, whereas like he already had his experience in the 30s. So what is very interesting about Gopi Krishna, and what became kind of like also the main focus of my thesis, was that he aimed to establish Kundalini research. So Kundalini research is not what I did.
Academic research, right? Although
like,
it might be called academic. I don't know.
So I like how I define Kundalini research is actually different from academic research.
Okay.
Like what I did, like could be also considered as Kundalini research, but to distinguish like a scholarly or an academic approach to Kundalini from this kind of like emic perspective, in my thesis I used Kundalini research exclusively for the emic exploration of like practitioners or of also interested religious and scientific figures. Since I was laying such an important weight on Gopi Krishna, I decided I'm gonna focus on Kundalini research and the history of it. So my thesis revolved around the modern history of Kundalini research. With Gopi Krishna constituting the main case study, but also highlighting how other important protagonists contributed to Kundalini research efforts evolving kind of like globally, you know, like yes in South Asia, yes in Europe, yes in North America, but also in Japan, for example.
Japan, okay,
yeah.
Wow.
So I found some really interesting source material, and so Kundalini research and Gopi Krishna, these are kind of like the two main trajectories of my thesis. And like in terms of the time frame, I was looking at the source materials between the 1880s and the 1980s, 1990s, so approximately 100 years. And I'm arguing that in these 100 years, Kundalini research like first like became more and more important, and then slowly decreased again in significance.
Interesting. What do you think happened?
Gopi Krishna died.
Okay.
I mean,
Fair enough.
so that was like one important reason why at least like the Gopi Krishna related Kundalini research projects slowly declined. I mean, there are still some of his collaborators and supporters that carry his work forward, and there were even new institutes that were founded in memory or in association with his research, but overall, like these international collaborations kind of stopped in the 1990s. And then also like in the 70s there was just like an overall excitement about like empirical yoga research. A lot of labs started to look into subtle energies and how they could be verified. And this is again something that we already see in the late 19th century, like in the 1880s and 1890s. In South Asia, a lot of members of the Theosophical Society,
Sure.
they already like had like this kind of scientific approach, or they hoped to apply scientific methods and means to to find evidence for subtle energies, to find evidence for other effects of yoga and meditation. And that's also like why I or not that's why, but I divided like this time frame into three main periods, and the main period, or the first wave, if you wish, that started like in the 1880s. So maybe to just like briefly talk about these three phases. Okay. So the first phase of Kundalini research happened during the 1880s to the 1890s, when like the first tantric texts were translated in a scientific light. So like theosophists and related figures, they would contribute to Kundalini's scientification by translating texts and by interpreting them in a scientific lens. And then the second phase was during the 1920s. Actually, it already started like in the late 1890s, and then kind of peaked during the 1920s, when there was like Vasandrele came up with his research. Swami Kumbhalayananda contributed with a lot of empirical yoga research. So there were like a lot of efforts, and obviously like the Arthur Avalon project had already come out with lots of publications. And then the third and main phase was in the second half of the 20th century, with Gopi Krishna's book kind of like starting the heyday of Kundalini research. So three periods that just played a very that help us to understand how Kundalini research evolved, and how it how there were like waves of significance and oblivion significance.
Yeah, no, that's great. And I think that really you were one of the only people, or scholars whom I knew that was working on this kind of third wave, as you call it. You know what I mean? I think it's so tempting to get lost in the 19th century or early 20th century and then never kind of connect the dots between that and the contemporary period. So yeah.
I mean, I'm a 19th century girl. I love this time period, but then actually I discovered this wonderful archive in a library in Zurich, and it's the legacy of Gopi Krishna. Okay. And when I found this archive, I was like, oh my God, that's a gem! Like complete, like a mess. Yeah. A real mess, because unprocessed archive is always a mess. But a lot of letters, a lot of primary sources that nobody's ever looked at. And when I found that, I was like, okay, I found my topic.
You found it. Yeah. No, that's a great find. That's a great find. I can relate.
Yeah.
I can relate. Yeah. So then, kind of moving on, but connected, the subtitle of the podcast is based on an Occult South Asia workshop at the University of Vienna, where you're still affiliated and where we met, I believe, for the first time. This podcast seeks to offer more critical analysis of the adjective occult. Your research clearly connects to this category, but what do you think are some of the benefits and our issues with using this word occult as an academic marker, even when treated generally, as we're doing here, in terms of hidden nature or realities?
Yeah, first of all, I'm very happy that the Vienna workshop brought so wonderful fruits, and
Sure.
that in this context we can talk again about it. So the workshop was in 2018.
I believe so, 2017, 2018.
Yeah. Because I remember I was still a master student then. And,
Okay.
but I already had quite an interest in the occult. Didn't really understand what was going on.
Does anyone? Right? Yeah.
Well, the occult. I mean, it's everywhere, nowhere. It's Okay, let's start like this. So, occultism, I think, must be understood as as a modern category, because especially if you look at occultism and esotericism, that are usually or often used in a way that you can't really distinguish them, or they're used interchangeably, and I think that it's very important to make clear that it's not the same thing.
Okay.
Perhaps sometimes there are parallels, but especially if you look at the origins of the categories, esotericism is definitely something that is rooted more in antiquity, and that was very common during the Renaissance. And I think occultism is something that we really only find from the 19th century onwards. So it's I really like it how my colleague Julian Strube really describes it as a more like a concept that evolved in response to historical and discursive processes, so I feel like it must be really also seen as a political category, and not only as a descriptive one that it is clearly associated with experimental spirituality, and obviously with a lot of new forms of practices, psychology, and has a strong link to mesmerism and all of this. But I really feel with occultism, all the discourses that happened during the 19th and 20th centuries, that are really, really important to mention when it comes to occultism. And the occult, it has just a very strong attraction. There's definitely still this notion of the hidden or of the obscure, but for me it has really this experimental and discursive notion to it.
I see. So the adjective occult is sort of, in this formulation, inseparable from kind of the occultism overlay in the 19th century in some way. It's very difficult to separate that out in some way.
That's how I define it. Because I feel and I'm not so familiar with earlier forms of esotericism, so I wouldn't be the right person to ask how much you find the term occult in earlier sources. But I personally, when I use it in my research, I associate it with the process of occultism. Or with the category of occultism and the related processes.
Sure. In the 19th century, right?
Yeah,
that's where you are. Okay, so speaking of, you brought up mesmerism here, and I know that you co-edited a volume on subtle energies with Julian Strube and Dominique Zore. And what was it like seeing all these perspectives about subtle energies from around the world? And what are some distinct characteristics of these energies as developed both within and outside of Asia?
Yeah, so this this edited volume. It is online as of today.
Congratulations! Today. Okay, so it's out.
Yeah, I think maybe like
to make a
two
post
days
about
ago. But
right.
I received we've been waiting for this email,
Cool.
but yeah, now it's like the ebook is released. We're still waiting for the hardcover.
Cool.
It's wonderful to see this volume being finally published. And it is like the articles are the conference proceedings of So the articles are the conference proceedings of a conference we had in Vienna. And actually, in the beginning, I mentioned this project that I was involved in on energy healing. And so the subtle energy workshop was in the frame of this project, and we had really wonderful contributors. Not all of the contributors also wrote an article for the edited volume, but many did, and we also found additional contributors who were not at the conference, since we wanted to really give like a global perspective, we were really blessed to find another colleague, Adrian Munoz, who wrote a perspective on the Americas. He's based in Mexico City, and then Tin Cheung, he also gave a perspective of a more East Asian perspective. But basically, like, the book is divided in 4 parts. The first part is kind of like a prelude where Dominic Zöhrer, he really sets the stage, and he gives 2 very detailed chapters, or he provides a very detailed wait, one more time.
Okay.
So Dominic Zöhrer, he really sets the stage, and he offers a very detailed description of the origins of subtle energies.
Okay.
So that's a very good start. And then we have subtle energies in healing, in therapy. For example, Wouter Hanegraaff is writing on subtle energies in ayahuasca healing. We have Justin Stein, who's writing about subtle energies in Reiki. I wrote a contribution about terrestrial energy healing, and what subtle energies play a role in, if you leave like the human body, subtle energies that transcend the human body.
Sure.
We also focused on yoga, tantra. We have Hugh Urban and Tova Olsen, who are writing about Kundalini.
Okay.
And then finally, we're looking at subtle energies regarding politics and the arts. So Julian Strube is writing about blunt politics and the notion of vril. Jessica Albrecht is writing about sexual education. And subtle energies in eugenics. So it's like you see, and this is, and I haven't mentioned all, and all of them deserve to be mentioned, but it would be too much now. But I just want to emphasize like what a broad spectrum subtle energies cover.
It really does.
And mainly like subtle energies are associated with South Asian religions, but there's so much more. And one attempt or one aim of the volume was also to highlight how subtle energies were globalized. So it's not something that just happened in South Asia or like maybe in Europe with like the influence of Greek philosophy. It was also like a very transcultural process. So that's a really important aim. And of course, like also you wrote an important article.
Thanks for the invitation to contribute.
It was great to have you writing about Sarvapati Swami and his like Shaktipat, his version of Shaktipat. So I wouldn't want to miss mentioning your article. So thank you, Keith. I'm sure that all the readers will enjoy it, or I hope so. I definitely enjoyed working a lot with all the contributors and seeing like how how vast is the spectrum of subtle energies. I was surprised myself, and yeah, we're happy that we could publish it with Brill in the Newman book series, and yeah.
Great.
Happy
Well,
about that.
congratulations on that achievement, and
you.
also to Dominique Söder and Julian Strube for that. I read Dominique's chapter in the Occult 19th Century. Is that volume that was published several years back, and really learned a lot. So I look forward to checking out this introduction, and hopefully there can be, this year at the center too, or this month, Simon Cox, who wrote A Genealogy of the Subtle Body, is here as a resident. So I'm wondering if in the future there'll be some sort of ping pong, between some of the Chinese and Taoist contexts too.
Yeah,
So,
I mean, Simon Cox's book has been a very important forerunner of our work. And I really want to mention how important Simon's work has been. And I mean, I had very productive exchanges with Simon so far, and I attended 2 CTR conferences on the subtle body. So there are several exchanges between us as scholars, and also regarding the topics of the subtle body and subtle energies. So obviously they are closely related, and I have a feeling that Simon and I can't speak of my co-editors, will continue to collaborate, or at least I hope so.
Cool. Well, maybe we can call him up and see if he's available for tea after the interview or something. All right. So I noticed on your bio that as a research fellow at the Department of Religious Studies in Vienna, you're examining the use of machines in alternative religion as well. And what kind of machines and how are they being used? And as a preface, I know that, in today's world, there's a lot of talk about AI as well, and machines, machine learning and all of that. So.
So I, aside from my 2 jobs that you already mentioned, I'm also a research fellow at the Department of Religious Studies at the University of Vienna, and as part of this role, I'm writing a research application. And in the hopeful event that I received the grant, I would work on a project that's called Divine Machines. I think I call it Divine Devices. The use of machines in the 19th and 20th centuries. And so basically, I mean, I'm not a very technologically well-versed person.
We're all humanities scholars at heart, right? I mean, it's good to admit that. Yeah.
But I just really love weird stuff.
Okay.
And and as I was writing my dissertation, I came across a lot of weird persons, and I want to make sure that weird for me is something positive.
Okay. Yeah.
So
high weirdness, as Eric Davis calls it.
Eric Davis.
Okay.
Thank you for this. And so I came across some figures that invented and or used machines trying to depict Kundalini in the body. And so I was like, oh my God, that's so wild. They're inventing machines, trying to find evidence, or also not only finding evidence, but maybe also getting Kundalini rising. So having different uses for these machines. But anyway, there were these people who were working with machines, and I was like, wow, that's such an interesting approach to the topic. And so I was like, maybe there is more of these people who are using machines to find evidence for something that is kind of difficult to find evidence for, and there's a lot of research going on religion and technology. I mean, you mentioned AI. It's something that in our everyday life we have to deal with. So obviously that's something also that touches upon our research topics. But I realized that there hasn't been any solid research on the use of machines or devices in religious studies, and so I'm particularly interested in occult devices. meaning like machines that were used in the context of experimental spirituality and psychology, and that have like some kind of link to occult or esoteric currents. And so I would like to look at 3 different case studies. So the first would be like machines for vitality and health. So there would be like one person that does not really fit into my time frame, but you always need one that is a little bit
earlier or outside.
So that would be Franz Anton Mesmer and his bouquet, which was a machine, or you would rather say like it was a device, like that was just designed to have kind of like a communal healing experience. So like more people at a time could be healed. And then you have like people like one moment. And then you have people like Wilhelm Reich, who came up with their theories on organs. So he developed like what was it called? An organ energy accumulator, I believe.
As in the instrument organ?
As an instrument, yeah. And he was doing experiments in Vienna, so I kind of like I couldn't really resist to include him. And then there's the second case study would look at machines that I've already examined before in the context of my Kundalini studies. So that would be like electrophysiological machines, like biofeedback, EEG, and stuff like that. So Elma and Alison Green, for example, who worked at the Menninger Foundation, they were important figures that did empirical yoga research with machines, but then also like interesting and absolutely wild figures like the Japanese parapsychologist Hiroshi Motoyama, or the Israeli-American engineer Itzhak Bentov. These are all figures that invented machines to find like evidence in the 4 subtle energies, or to trigger some kind of like trigger or activate some kind of subtle energies or other subtle components. For example, Hiroshi Motoyama's chakra instrument aimed to monitor the activation, the level of activation of the chakras. And actually Hiroshi Motoyama, he's my favorite.
Okay, all right. Yeah.
I wish I spoke Japanese so I could read the primary sources, but I've already talked with some colleagues who have the language skills to collaborate, so that I can concentrate on the transmission history and the reception history, and my colleague could work more on the primary sources. There is a lot of English translations, so it would be possible to include him in my research project without the knowledge of the primary language. But he's like, I really like him.
Great. If I remember correctly, I think J.J. Storm presented on something similar here at the center last year or something. Maybe it was the same person.
JJ was also, he gave the keynote at this year's ESRI conference. And it was a really, really interesting lecture, and I was very interested in listening. But then it was his last slide, and there he was, Hiroshi Motoyama, and I was like, no way, I can't believe it, because you basically don't hear anything of Motoyama anywhere. I remember there was one article by Karl Baier where in the conclusion, in one sentence, he mentioned Motoyama, and so I was very surprised to see that JJ was aware of Motoyama. And I mean, in my dissertation, I dedicated an entire chapter to Motoyama, and now actually also here at the center, I contributed a reference entrance to to the database on mystical experiences.
Right. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
So I'm working on getting more information out on Motoyama. But yeah, JJ, that was so much fun, and I just also met him and talked again about Motoyama. So. Yeah. The third case study of my research project would look at imagined machines.
Imagined machines.
Imagined machines. Yeah. And what do I mean by imagined machines, or what would I like to look at? So these would be extraterrestrial technology or extraterrestrial machines. So in the context of New Age, in the context of also like right-wing leaning religious figures, you find a lot of fascination for extraterrestrial intelligence, and so part of this extraterrestrial intelligence are the are imagined machines, like be it UFOs, be it like some kind of other machines that help you to gain deeper insights, and so I came across some examples in the literature, and I was like, wow, that's like, it's not really machines that you can touch, but it's machines that exist in visionary experiences. It's machines that exist in the writings of UFO abductees reports, and so that would be another type of occult devices that I would like to look at.
Very cool. Well, it sounds like a fantastic project. I think we need to have a mix between steampunk and X-Files soundtrack in the background throughout all of this or something, because that's really fascinating and super interesting. So I mean, as if that weren't enough, I mean, I'm curious if you could tell our viewers, what are some other current projects and initiatives that you're pursuing or wish to pursue in the future, sort of just to close us out here?
Yeah. Well, so one of the biggest projects of the next 1 or 2 years is obviously the publication of my dissertation.
Right.
One problem about it is that my dissertation was very long. And Karl Baier and I, we kept on saying, like, why did you write so much? Why did I write so much? I mean, there was so much to say, but problem/chance. So there will be 2 book projects.
2 book projects, okay. All right.
So I decided to divide the dissertation in 2. So one book will look at Kundalini research in North America.
Okay.
So looking at institutes like the Esalen Institute, like the Californian Institute for Integral Studies, the Menninger Foundation, and just giving a very broad introduction into Kundalini research in the second half of the 20th century in North America. And the second book project will look at Gopi Krishna and his influence, his international networks, and his Kundalini research. So we have 2 big Kundalini books coming out, hopefully the next 2 years. As you know, it takes a while.
It does, but this sounds like something definitely to look forward to.
Both books are right now in peer review, so
they're already in the pipeline.
Let's see. I will share more news hopefully soon, and a more how do you say, like a more recent or like something to that will come out sooner is my monograph on John Michel. John Michel has been a British author and esotericist who has been a very influential figure in British counterculture, but also British traditionalism. And I did the first comprehensive study on John Michel.
Wow.
And that will be published in February by Equinox. So that's really exciting news.
Congratulations. Wow.
A lot of book projects now.
Yeah. How do you find time? Do you have a special steampunk machine, visionary machine that helps churn all of these out? I mean,
everybody needs a special machine. Yeah, so these are kind of like the main book projects. I mean, there's another edited volume that I'm working on, but that's not so much related to my own research. It's it's part of one of my jobs. On like the transformation of religion, like on a more broad and interdisciplinary sense. Yeah, I mean, there's the machine project. I would like to work more on the human potential movement, since SLN is still very close to my heart. And yeah, so these are just some ideas and visions of where this journey may lead me.
Cool. Well, hopefully those of you who are watching this later on will see the sort of realistic outputs of these. So thank you so much for joining us, Marleen, and we really appreciate your time, and look forward to all of the future outputs and research and trajectories and all of that. Thanks so much for being here.
Thanks so much for having me, Keith.
केश काल वस्त्र परिच्छेद रहितं सुसा